David, are you leading the lesson next week? Oh, okay. So somebody else is doing Sunday morning. Okay. All right. Just remind me to give you I'll give somebody the commentary so they can take a look at it and see if there's anything in there that they would like to bring out about the lesson. So let's go to God in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, please help us with our minds and hearts as we prepare to study your word. Guide us in a direction that you would have us to go in learning, and help us to learn the things that are important to each one of us, that we can use those things in your service. We praise you for your honor and your power and your glory and your justice. And we praise you for all the things that you are, so that we might have this opportunity to serve you and learn to serve you better. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Somebody want to read through, we're going to read through the rest of Psalms 9 here. So starting at verse 6 and going through the end of the chapter. Somebody want to read that?
O thy enemy, destruction will come to a perpetual end, and thou hast destroyed cities that are mortal and perished with them. The Lord shall be secure forever. He hath prepared his throne in judgment, and he shall judge the world righteously. He shall visit the justice and uprightness. The Lord also will be a refuge and a rest, refuge in times of trouble. They that know thy name will put their trust in thee. Thou, Lord, hast not forsaken them. Sing praises to the Lord, which dwelleth in Zion. Declare unto thee his doings. When he maketh petition for blood, he remembereth them. He forgetteth not the cry of the humble. Have mercy upon me, O Lord. Consider my trouble, which I suffer of them that hate me. Thou that liftest me up from the gates of death, that I may show forth all thy praise in the gates of the daughter of Zion. I will rejoice in thy salvation. Even the unhappy death that they made, the death which they give is their own for the taking. The Lord is known for the judgment which he executes. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. Gideon Salah, the wicked shall be turned to hell, and all the nations that forget God. For the needy shall not always be forgotten. The expectation of the Lord shall not perish forever. Rise, O Lord, let not man prevail. Let the heathen be judged in thy sight. And if we are Lord, the nations may know themselves to be within.
Last week, verses 1 through 5, we went through, some things that we should do to praise God. We also went through a little bit on what happens to those who work to sin. So we're just continuing on with that in verse 6 here. And again, this is just the psalmist David, and he's talking about where he feels like he is, both himself and people around him that are opposing him and opposing God. And that's just the background for what we're talking about here. So in verse 6 it says, O thou enemy, destructions are come to a perpetual end, and thou hast destroyed cities. Their memorial is perished with them. That's pretty dark, so what can we gain from that? Does that bring anything to mind for anyone?
Bad as it gets, it will eventually come to an end.
Yeah, that's one thing. It's coming to an end. Hope you're on the other side of this, but it's definitely coming to an end at some point. And for those that have already died, it's already come to an end. They've already prepared to be judged, and now they're just waiting to be judged. Anything else anyone sees here? I think one thing I see here goes back to last week, something we talked about, which is the enemies of God, all their preparations to be great or to sin against someone in some way so that it holds them up and the other person down becomes their own perishing, becomes their own way to perish eternally. But not only that, but God ensures that the enemies of Him, that their works come to no value. So it doesn't matter what evil does in the past, because His light overcomes whatever evil they've done, and all the evil becomes valueless. Anything else anybody sees there? In verse 7, chapter 9 here, it says, "But the Lord shall endure forever. He hath prepared His throne for judgment." Talked a little bit about this last week too. Anybody see anything there that we can gain?
Contrast between 6 and 7, as far as the structure coming in, and the very first one, of course, of your forever. In our prayers, that's our hope and goal right there. You know, if you're going to get it, yet, if we endure by the Lord, we'll endure.
Right.
Kind of same thing with the next phrase about this throne judge. We talk a lot about being on the right side of judgment. Kind of praying keeps on that side of his righteous.
Right. Yeah, so we need to recognize which side we're on. We need to recognize that we need to be following all the time. He's prepared at all times for judgment, so He's already there waiting to judge. And we talked a little bit about how He's doing that. It's not like He's like if somebody's writing something in a book and then He's going to read it at the end. He's ready now. Now He's ready again. Now He's ready again. He's ready all the time. There's no stop to when God's ready to judge. He's already seen all your works. He's judging along the way. Not something we're supposed to do, but because we don't know the heart of the person, but God sees the heart of the person. So He understands where judgment will fall if the path continues in that way, whether good or bad. There's another point we made last week that I think is important here in this verse. It says, "But the Lord shall endure forever." This kind of goes back to this forever comment. He will endure forever, which means His righteousness endures forever, which means judgment on either side endures forever. It's not like there's an end after judgment. So this righteousness that God is righteousness. This should propel us to understand that whichever side we choose, we're not just choosing a temporary, punishment or a temporary win for righteousness. We're choosing something permanent. And We should recognize too that how life is such a limited part of that forever. It's such a temporary part that all those things that can happen to you on earth are so small that you should recognize that this forever part is so significant to you and to anybody around you. So let's look at verse 8. It says, "And he shall judge the world in righteousness. He shall minister judgment to the people in uprightness." What can we gain from that?
When Sandra was reading it, it came to my mind thinking about how few people in the Bible, as far as when tragedy happened, few people were saved. You think about Noah's day, Moses' day, you think about Joshua and Caleb and entering into the promised land, and what Jesus said about few will be saved, right? And then you look at what verse 8 says, he's going to judge us based upon righteousness. And it's so hard to fathom the fact that there are so many people who will be lost. It's a problem for all people who are striving to be or want to be, or think religiously want to be saved in that respect, and they evaluate their life based upon what we determine is good or bad, right? When you look at righteousness, that's not just good or bad. Righteousness is being obedient to God. And so he's going to judge us based upon, having heard the truth, learned the truth, whether or not we obey the truth and make that the standard of life. So it says it's judged in righteousness, it's judged by obedience to the word of God.
Exactly. It's one reason we should be reading so much. I've noticed, I think I've said this before, but I've noticed as we've studied Kings, and that the Kings, look, I recognize that they're doing something wrong, but God recognizes their heart, and God does something very different than what I think He should do. One king, makes one mistake, gets leprosy, and has to stay outside the city all of his life. The next king is way worse, and he just gets to live out his life, in evil. The punishment is the same, but I'm saying we don't know God's righteousness, especially if we don't study the Bible, and especially if we need to study the Old Testament and the New Testament. I think we need to study the Old Testament to understand what God has judged some of those people because He killed them. So the people He killed, they're judged the day they're killed. That's the end for them. Their judgment is set. Whatever it is, it's set. I'm not saying I know what the judgment for those kings is, but I'm saying that's the end of it right there, where He said, that's enough out of you, and you're done. And so I think for us to understand God's mercy, we need to understand His vengeance on sin, on the evil, that He can't be a part of it so much. I think there's this time when your heart is so hardened that in the Old Testament, He's just, we see one incident and then they die. But you've got to understand that their life is probably full of those incidents. That it's just their life that's their direction. Your direction is toward evil instead of your direction toward righteousness. And I think David recognizes his direction is toward righteousness. This is pretty hard to do, I think, to get yourself in a position where you understand what righteousness is, and then you do that. Because I feel like, at least for me, it's sometimes hard for me to recognize what righteousness is, because God is righteous, and I would choose something very different. And then, so you think, okay, so He gives this person leprosy, He lets this person live out their life in total sin, building idols, doing everything he can to do the opposite, getting rid of things that are in the temple, whatever, giving money away, and you think that's so evil. And then the next person comes in and they're better, at least from what we can read, and then he goes, nope, that's enough out of you. I'm going to have your family removed from the face of the earth. It's just like, what? I don't know. I don't understand. So I think to understand God's righteousness, we really need to be reading all the time. I don't think it's an easy thing to understand. And I think if we don't spend our time, I've said this before, the time that you spend in the Bible is times that you're not sinning. Hopefully you're not sinning while you're reading the Bible. But it's time that you spend learning what righteousness is. Does anybody else see anything from verse 8? This is David talking, and he says, he shall minister judgment to the people in uprightness. Again, this is David's recognition that he understands, or he believes that he is doing the right thing. He believes that it's okay for me to be judged right now because I'm on the right path. My heart is in the right direction. Even when I sin, I'm going to turn from that immediately and go the other way. So I think it's David's recognition here when he says that God will judge us the world in his righteousness, and he shall minister judgment to the people in his uprightness. He feels like I'm doing the right thing. I'm okay. To say this kind of stuff out loud for me is very difficult because sometimes I'm not sure where I'm at. I'm not sure. I know where my heart is and where I want to be directed. But I think we question ourselves a lot about where we are and are we doing the right thing. And so I think you need to have this same mentality, figure out where you are, really figure out where you are, and then be able to recognize it, especially with God. You should be able to say, I think I'm on the right path. I'm ready, to be judged any day, whatever day you choose. That's the day I'm ready to be judged. So it's not an easy thing either. So we're not talking about something that's easy at all, or it's very difficult. You can feel yourself on the path and feel yourself wanting to. I noticed on my meat diet, I'm only eating meat, and I felt so good for 4 to 6 months almost being on this diet and losing weight and not feeling. I notice when I eat sugar or carbs, it just takes me down, But then I taste sugar and I'm like, well, who cares? You get this 5 minutes of eating sugar. That's way better than anything else that could happen. And then you start to realize, I'm probably 3 months off the diet and I just got back on and I'm starting to see the same thing, like, why did I feel bad every day? Oh, because I didn't have the drive to keep on the diet. Because I tasted sugar and I was like, well, I really want this every day. So I think that becomes the same thing with studying. It's hard to stay in the Bible. I'll say it. It's difficult to read every day and think, what can I gain from this? It becomes challenging to your mind, and I think, especially when sometimes you can't make sense of it. So another thing I do is, ask for guidance. Like, what am I supposed to get out of this? Sometimes it feels like I don't know what to get out of it. And so maybe I read it over and over and over, or what I usually do is listen to it on YouTube. I just find somebody whose voice I can stand listening to and listen to the verse over and over until it really sinks in what's going on here. Maybe read the verses around it. So let's look at verse 9. The Lord also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. Does anybody see there? You can remember this is David talking. I've said this before, and I think it's a good thing to remember when you're praying, that you can point out what God has already told you He's going to do. Especially if you feel like you're in that situation. Here, David is in a situation where he feels like he's oppressed, or he needs help. And he's explaining to God, who already knows what he is. Like, he's explaining to God for himself to realize, hey, this is me. I'm in this position. I need your help. I recognize by what I know about you that you are going to support me. You're going to help me endure oppression. You're going to be my refuge from trouble. So if you recognize that, and so you say it to God, it's a way of you reminding yourself, this is where I need to focus my energy. I need to focus on God. So that when I focus on God, that makes me realize that I need to be more focused on God. And that's a difficult thing, I think. We see it easier, I think, when we're striving for something, when we're striving for greatness in something. You decide, this is my thing, I'm going for it. That's all I'm going to do for now. It's easier to see that I need to be learning something every day when I'm doing that. When I start out, you probably start out because you have some proclivity to being, okay, let's say. But it feels like you're good. You're really strong at this. I remember I used to run, and my dad would get up in the morning. He ran cross country in college, and so he would just come in our room and say, time to get up and run. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. We're going out before it's light. And I always thought I had to. I didn't know there was a choice. But it didn't feel like there was a choice. But when you got good at it, I realized I could outrun my dad by the time I was 11, because I've just been running my entire life, and every morning he would say, okay, so you got to beat your time from yesterday. So you're like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. How do I beat my time from yesterday? Obviously, we didn't do that every day, but a lot of days we beat it, by a second, running a mile. You beat it by a second or 2 seconds, and you do that every day we probably did it for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, till my brother and I were so much faster than my dad because he had pushed us. And then it became something where we were way faster than anybody who was in our class until, people grew up and then they became really good. But, up through the middle of high school, we were fast, especially on long distance, because that's what we trained for. So I think we can see it that way. Oh, I'm getting better, so I should get better. That's the same thing you do with the Bible. You see that you're learning more, and it should propel you to study even more. And then, the thing that we did, my brother and I did, is we fell off because we're like, oh, we're already better than you, so no more training needed. I can get up in the morning and outrun you any day of the week. I don't even need to train. And so I think that's the same thing we do with the Bible is, yeah, we got it. I understand what it says. I don't need any extra training on the Bible. I've been through Bible class. I went to school. My entire life I went to school at a Christian school teaching me the Bible every day, thinking, yeah, I've already heard this story. I don't need it again. But I wasn't getting it, you know. That's why we need to look at it every day. And I was talking to my friend the other day. He was talking about he reads the Bible through at least once every year for the last, he said, now at 26 years, something like that. And the other day he sent me something. He said, I never even realized this. He sent me notes every morning about what he's reading. And I was like, wow, I can't believe you didn't realize. I mean, you didn't see that. I mean, I'd never seen it either, but it just makes you understand how important it is to read it over and over and over, to be in the Bible all the time, because you miss what you don't want to see or what you don't need to see or what is not as important right now. So I think that's all that said to just say it's a struggle to continue to work, and I think we all know that from whatever we've chosen to be good at. But when we do struggle, I think back to the verse, God's our refuge. I mean, spend time praying, spend time with God. Set aside the time instead of just thinking I'll do it at the end of the day once I've done everything else. Set aside the time. Make the time every day to read, to study, so that God can be your refuge. Because I think we also think that because we're Christians, God's our refuge. He's your refuge if you're serving. So the serving, the part that keeps you supported is using the Word to support your faith, support your service. And if you're not in the Word all the time, then sometimes your service falls off and you don't even recognize it. You just know that or I'll put it in terms of me. I know I was in the seat. I know I was where I needed to be. So that's not enough. You need to be in the Word every day so that He can support you. He supports you. I recognize now that when I read something, I'm like, well, I needed that. Or I'll ask a question of someone and say, what are you supposed to do in this case? What do you think God thinks? And they're like, I'm not exactly sure, and they give me 4 different answers, and then I go to the Bible the next day, and all of a sudden, there's the answer, that I thought was so difficult to gain, but it just was right there. And I don't know why that is, just happened to be where I was reading in the Bible that day, or something that Rob said, or whatever it is. If you're talking about the Bible with other people too, sometimes they're in the same place as you, and they'll help you recognize something that's important to you. It's the same thing that you guys do for me in this class. Some things that I don't see in the verses, you guys bring up, and I think, wow, I didn't even see that. So let's look at verse 10. It says, and they that know thy name will put their trust in thee. For thou, Lord, hast not forsaken them that seek thee. So what can we gain out of this verse? First, what is knowing God's name? What do you think that means? Does that mean we know all of the things that He called Himself and told us to call Him?
I think it still pins it down to the exclusive group. There's a lot of people that know Jesus, know His name, but they don't know Him. Being believed and having blessed to call upon or talk about here in this different passage.
Yeah, so knowing His name is more than just knowing what to call Him. Knowing His name, we've already talked about a couple of times, knowing God's name. God's name is powerful just in itself. We don't need anything else there's no power above His name because we don't know Him. We can't know Him fully, so His name, that's the power. And so what David's really saying is knowing God's name is knowing Him as much as possible. So that's as much as you can know. So if you know as much as you can know about God, which means you're going to have to be in the Bible and studying and trying to learn. And if you're not doing that, then you don't know God's name. If you don't full time try to learn who God is, then that's knowing God's name. So that's who puts their trust in God. So you need to be in His Word to be able to put your trust in Him and realize that those things that, let's say, the apostles went through are possible for even us if we know God's name or if we trust in God. So what about that second part? For thou, Lord, hast not forsaken them that seek thee. Anybody see anything there?
He is praising for his faithful. Being the God that he is, trusting, like I said, according to knowing that you trust him. Right. And then he's not going to forsake them if they seek. And then they seek you first to God, the New Testament parallels. What are we supposed to do? Same thing they were doing in righteousness, seeking God.
So, go ahead.
You look at the examples in the New Testament of people who were converted. You look at the Ethiopian eunuch. He was traveling, reading his Bible, and God supplied the preacher to help him to understand what he needed to do as far as making his life right. You look at Cornelius and how he was acting, what he was doing in his life as far as God and helping others and doing those sort of things, and God helped him to find the preacher so that he could know the truth and that sort of thing. I think that's the way that God operates. Our hearts are moving towards Him truly, for the benefit of God, then He's going to provide those situations. I think that's how we did the same here. He will help us if we have that heart.
Yeah, so I think the first part of what you both said is we have to be seeking Him. So how do we seek Him? It goes back to being in His Word, because that's what we have to know God. So if you're not in His Word, then you're not seeking Him. You're not pressing hard. You need to be pressing hard in that search for who God is. And you need to be, if the way you're studying or the way you're reading is not helping you move forward, then you need to be seeking that guidance. I think the same way that Rob talked about there. God's going to help you if you are seeking hard enough and you want to know the truth. Then God will help you find the truth. And whether it's you find it on your own or you're talking to someone else who can help you understand, and you're fighting through it, you're struggling with it. So it's almost not a really fun idea, especially if you're not interested in, I want to do other things besides read the Bible and try to understand. It doesn't become a very exciting idea. But if you become a servant and you are truly seeking, then I think it becomes, one of the best things that you can do. One of the happiest things that I do is when I'm seeking God. It's one of the things that focuses my energy on something great. And really, I've talked to several friends now that I used to never talk about the Bible with. And when I'm talking with them and hearing what they have to say and struggling to understand, that's some of the best times I have now. And I think that's the way it is for everyone. If you really get serious about doing it and you plan to do it, then I think it becomes something great.
You're talking about your running. I despise just running for the sake of running. We were playing ball and chasing that sort of thing, mates. But they talk about those people who are truly into the distance running and that sort of thing. Or they reach a threshold time that I've done, tried to run some. It never got to the point where, yeah, this is exhilarating. I enjoy this. I want to go run and hit that point right there. And I think that's somewhat true as far as any endeavor, especially when it comes to Bible study. There is a threshold where the Bible does become a joy, peace, the things that are promised in that. But there is a point where you have to push to that point where you get there, right? To have that blessing from you. And most people don't ever get to that point. It's kind of like a battle to just make it a daily thing. On the opposite end of that, it's kind of like a workout. If you quit doing those things you know are good for you, it's so hard to get yourself back engaged in doing it. So the spiritual side of it applies to it just like the physical and that threshold and moving forward and that sort of thing. And we don't understand or we don't make that application in the spiritual realm like we see it in the physical realm.
Yeah, and I think, something I don't understand when somebody wants to lift weights. It's never been fun to me. Because I've never made it to that point where I get past something, some goal that makes it exciting. But to run, I understand when people talk about it. Doesn't mean I want to go do it right now because I'm over it. But when you do it and you get to a wall, you're running and you get to a wall where you think, I cannot take one more step. And you take 10 more steps. I mean, my dad used to have us count. He said, when you get to that place, start counting. And he said, count to 10, then start over, count to 10 again. Every time your foot hits the ground. And all of a sudden, all that stress on your body and your heart and your legs, it just goes away. It disappears. You're running 4 miles, and all of a sudden now, it's like, wait, what happened? I've got a second wind. I'm going now. And we always used to be really powerful at the end because of what my dad taught us about our running. We would run 10Ks all the time. And so when we would do that, you would usually hit one wall, and it was right before the end of the race because we had built up to that. And right before the end of the race, I'm running beside somebody, one of the church members, talking to him, and he said, well, there's the finish line. I said, well, I'll see you later then. And I'm just gone, like it's just a burst of energy. I think we do the same thing, though, with the Bible. We struggle, we go fast and we work through difficulties and it becomes hard and it becomes harder and it becomes more difficult. And then you're like, well, I'm not learning anything. And I don't know why you're not learning anything. But I think there's times where maybe our heart's not open to it or we don't know what to look at to propel us forward. But if you can get past that, then it becomes easy again. I think we run through these cycles as human beings where we have to struggle through the difficult times. And I think for David, we can see this right now. This is a difficult time, but he's pressing forward. He's recognizing what God will do. He's recognizing that if he's righteous, that he'll be taken care of. And this is kind of equivalent to what I think about running. When you run 26 miles, you might hit 3 or 4 walls of, I can't take one more step. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, what happened? You just get past it. And I think we're going to do this our entire life. We're going to hit these walls. We're going to stop. And we're going to get further and further without these walls being in place of us. And I think that's where David is in his life, which he's past, I got it. I'm going to suffer right now. But there's going to be something on the other side of this suffering, even if it's, a year from now. It's still going to be something on the other side of the suffering, something that David knows that probably a lot of us don't understand fully. And I'm not saying nobody does, but he understands something about this because it's been his entire mission and being. So I think that's something we can learn. The other thing about all this is that he's telling us we need to seek God. So that's the first part of all that. If you don't seek, then none of this is going to happen. So seeking is a full-time job. So if you think you've looked enough and you've read the Bible enough, you just haven't. So I think we'll end it there, but we didn't get very far. We only got through 5 verses again. But I hope people are gaining something from these lessons about, I know I'm talking more, and I really appreciate your guys' comments about how this affects your lives, because it really helps me to focus my energy on it. But we'll end there, and I'll say a prayer to end the class. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this time that we can come and worship you. Help us to focus our minds as we continue our worship, and help us to gain something out of your word that we can take in our everyday lives. Help us to focus our hearts on seeking you every day, and to where it gets to a point where we recognize that if we continue to seek you, that there'll be refuge on the other side, even if that's in eternity. Please help us to understand where we are and understand what kind of time we need to seek you in an important way, in a significant way, and help us to focus that energy to prepare time to serve you every day, commune with you in prayer. Help be with us as we serve and honor you and praise you, to do that in a way that you would have us to do it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.